Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 5, Narada's Instructions on Srimad Bhagavatam, text 37, 1537. Om Namo Bhagavate Tubhyam Vasudevaya Dhimahi Padyumnaya Niruddhaya Nama Sankarshanaya Cha. Srila Prabhupada's translation and purport. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Translation. Let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva, along with his plenary expansions, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarsana. Purport. According to Pancharatra, Narayana is the primeval cause of all expansions of Godhead. These are Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Vasudeva and Sankarsana are on the middle, left, and right. Pradyumna is on the right of Sankarsana, and Aniruddha is on the left of Vasudeva, and thus the four deities are situated. They are known as the four aides de camp of Lord Sri Krishna. This is a Vedic hymn or mantra beginning with Omkar Pranava, and thus the mantra is established by the transcendental chanting process, namely Om Namo Dhimahi, etc. The purport is that any transaction, either in the field of fruitive work or in empiric philosophy, which is not ultimately aimed at transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be useless. Naradaji has therefore explained the nature of unalloyed devotional service by his personal experience in the development of intimacy between the Lord and the living entity by a gradual process of progressive devotional activities. Such a progressive march of transcendental devotion for the Lord culminates in the attainment of loving service of the Lord, which is called prema in different transcendental variegatedness, called rasas, tastes. Such devotional service is also executed in mixed forms, namely mixed with fruitive work or empiric philosophical speculations. Now the question which was raised by the great rishis, headed by Shaunaka, regarding the confidential part of Suta's achievement through the spiritual master, is explained herein by the chanting of this hymn consisting of 33 letters. And this mantra is addressed to the four deities, or the Lord with his plenary expansions. The central figure is Lord Sri Krishna because the plenary portions are his aides de camp. The most confidential part of the instruction is that one should always chant and remember the glories of the Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his different plenary portions expanded as Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. These expansions are the original deities for all other truths, namely either Vishnu Tattva or Shakti Tattvas. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Om Ajnana Tirantasya Jnananjana Chakshuremilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Panchakalpatarupyascha Kripasindhubhya eva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. Jai. So good to be back. Back in the Bhagavatam. I never left. I was in the Bhagavatam. In Canto 3. I just left this dimension and entered a different dimension and came back. It's like it's described in Shastra that mystic yogis, they can travel from one planetary system to another through the Ganga, because the Ganga actually exists in the higher, lower, and middle planetary systems. They just jump in and surface where they want. So I left chanting Bhagavatam here with you, and I was in Vrindavan Dham chanting Canto 3, but it's the same vibration. When you look up aides de camp, it's a French term that no one uses except in military context, and that it has a very specific meaning that I want to bring out.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada's use of words is always very precise. Nothing is actually whimsical. His grasp of the English language was masterful. please.
It says a subordinate military or naval officer acting as a confidential assistant to a superior, usually to a general officer or admiral, or God.
Or God.
I added that.
Or God.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so confidential. Confidential is also a very interesting word, confidential. So what we have here, just a little bit of context, the last two verses, you don't have to look up confidential, it's okay.
Okay.
The last two verses, Narada Muni is talking about the relationship of karma and gyan to bhakti, that bhakti contains both.
Mhm.
In the ultimate issue, we want our attachment to be fundamentally to bhakti and not to doing some particular activity, which is karma, or to the results that come back, also karma, or to some attainment of knowledge. Because if that's the case, then what Prabhupada is talking about, he mentions in this verse, he says, then you're talking about devotional service is also executed in mixed forms, namely mixed with fruit of work, i.e. karma, or empiric philosophical speculations. But in the last couple of verses, Narada Muni has been talking about how whatever work you do in this life for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord is called bhakti yoga. And knowledge that comes from that becomes a concomitant factor, right? It develops from it. And then while you're doing those activities for Krishna, you naturally remember him and his names and qualities. So even in the process of pure bhakti, it's not that it's devoid of the doing and the understanding, that becomes an expression of it, right? They're angas. Actually, they're not technically angas of bhakti. They're considered, trying to find the right Sanskrit word, but they're natural expressions of bhakti. Like we heard earlier in the Bhagavatam, for example, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janyatyashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chagadahaitukam. By performing devotional service to Krishna, causeless knowledge arises naturally, and renunciation. They're concomitant factors, meaning that they're things dependent on bhakti that naturally arise anyway, right?
Mhm.
So this is a rather philosophical, rather kind of technical verse and purport. It's interesting. So these four names, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarsana, what Prabhupada's referring to here is, as he starts his purport, he says, Narayana is the primeval cause of all expansions of Godhead. So it's described in Canto 1, Chapter 3, and also in other places. There's a way in which Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, expands as, what's his first expansion? First expansion of Krishna.
Raman?
Rama, no, his first expansion, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but it's Balaram. Balaram is actually his first expansion before he expands into the jivas, into all of us. Brahma is the topmost jiva. And Balaram is described, Balaram expands into Mahanarayana. And Narayana expands into these four, what's called the Chaturvyuha, these four forms of Godhead. And Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarsana. And this is a very technical presentation given throughout the Bhagavatam about the way in which, ontologically, like how it is that Krishna manifests into Balaram. Because actually Krishna himself, although he's the source of all of his own expansions, he does nothing but engage in Leela. He doesn't actually, for example, in Vrindavan, when there is the killing of a demon, Krishna does it, right? We see he does it. But when that happens, he takes a backseat and his own expansion manifests. One of his own Vishnu expansions manifests and, kills a Rishtasura or slays Putana. Krishna actually, he doesn't engage in that. He's just engaged with his devotees. But his own part and parcel, rather his own plenary expansion as Vishnu, who's also God. This is not talking about a jiva now. There's all these categories like Balaram, and then Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. They're all Vishnu Tattva. And what Prabhupada means when he says that Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, Narayana is the primeval source of all expansions. He's saying that they're all expanded from Narayana. And in the material world, from Mahasankarshan, you have then another expansion of Mahavishnu, who manifests the material world. He's a sub-expansion of Sankarsana. It's also described in Canto 3, for example, that Sankarsana is the presiding deity of false ego. Pradyumna is the presiding deity of intelligence. Aniruddha, the presiding deity of the mind. They're all functions of the material world. that are overseen by those particular deities. So in this way, Krishna's own expansions as non-different expansions of God have different roles they take, even in the material world. And so it's a very elaborate thing. We're not going to get into all the different ways, but the point is that's being introduced here. And what it means for us, aside from the kind of brain expanding exercise of understanding how the Supreme Person is so potent that he expands into other aspects of himself that are also God, and just appreciating what that must mean about his own greatness, is for us, when we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam and we're hearing about like the Matsya avatar, the fish incarnation, or Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, Lord Vishnu are considered to be guna avatars. They're incarnations specifically incarnated to oversee particular modes of nature. Vishnu is directly the Lord. He oversees a mode of goodness. Shiva, let's go to Brahma. Brahma is a jiva, like us, but at the most elevated level. He oversees the mode of passion. And Lord Shiva is actually something in between. He oversees the mode of ignorance. But they're all considered to be specific avatars for the purpose of guna. They oversee these three gunas. You have Leela avatars like Matsya, Kurma, the tortoise incarnation, Nrsingadev, like that. You have Yuga avatars, avatars that come every yuga. There's at least one avatar every yuga, for example. And there are Manvantaras. The Manus are considered special avatars, even though they're jivas. And so this science of the avatars of Krishna, how he's descending over and over again, and in which different ways, is given throughout the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. It's one of the main topics of the Bhagavatam. And when we're hearing that, we can connect that all back to Krishna. That's what we're meant to do here. That when we're thinking about Krishna, when we're chanting about him, we can understand that this includes all of his expansions that appear for different pastimes, that appear for the maintenance and proper function of the material world. Somebody has to oversee the modes of nature. Can't be me. I'm subject to the modes of nature. There has to be an empowered personality. Somebody has to come every yuga and renew things, provide a yuga dharma. Somebody has to come as a manu every, I think it's like 8 or 12 manus every day of Brahma, and they have special responsibilities. Those are all given, especially in the 8th canto, there's a description of that. And in this way, we can think about how Krishna has thought of everything, and he's so many steps ahead of all of us. Just like when you're a child, somebody may think back when they were a child, like everything seemed really simple, because it was. Now, Stu would give the example on Wisdom of the Sages that you can ask a child, where does your food come from? And the basic answer is it comes from my parents. And that's all the child really needs to worry about. It's like, yeah, mom and dad provided for me. Then when you get a little older, you realize there's a whole process behind that. Actually, there was a farmer, and then the farmer, took care of some plants, and then they became edible food. And then they sow it and they reap it, and then it's processed in some way, it's transported, and there's an exchange of money or services, which comes about because my parents actually are engaged in this process of economic development, which is a whole other world. We can go to school for that for millions of years. How that even works, no one even knows. And then you can trade or, provide some exchange for this food stuff, and then you cook it. That's a whole other thing. And then if you're really lucky, you grew up in a household where you can offer it to Krishna, and then you feed your child, and they're thinking, oh, here I am getting fed again, natural, simple. But there's actually a huge elaborate process, and every one of those steps is a whole science. What even is farming? Microbiology, all the different things in the soil that made it possible. But they're all being facilitated. And if you're interested, you can study any one of those things: economics, microbiology, weather, meteorology. You can get into like sociology and human exchange, anthropology, culinary arts. They're all actually very elaborate things. And so we can realize that there's actually a huge system. Even though it's very simple in a way, it's actually very elaborate. So similarly, when we come to purports like this, where we start to, get a little bit of tip of the iceberg of the elaborate ways in which Krishna is manifesting, we can start to get a sense of that same way we can feel like as a child, when we start to realize, oh, that's what my parents are doing when they go to the store. That's what they do when they go to work, right? They're actually doing something, and it's a big thing, and it's like, but it's a functional part of the whole. It's like, okay, so we can take it that way for now. We can take it that way for now, that Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna are confidential expansions of Krishna in the Vishnu Tattva, in the Tattva of Krishna. They're not jivas like us, they're actually also expansions of God who have specific duties. And how that works, what those duties are, how they're engaged in service to Krishna is described throughout the Bhagavatam. And functionally for us, the upshot is given in the verse itself. Let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshan. Let's therefore perform our bhakti bhajan. Let's do our practice of Krishna consciousness in this mode of appreciating that Krishna has provided a system for us. He's basically surrounded us, actually. We're completely surrounded. We're in a body made of his own energy. We're with other living entities who are also a kind of energy, a superior energy, as are we. And we have the spiritual sound vibration of Krishna's mantras. We have his deity forms, which are also described to be expansions of Krishna. They're deity expansions. They're actually expansions of Sankarsana, I think it's described in Canto 11. The deity actually expands through him, any deity. So like a gateway. When you walk through a door, the door is not the cause of you being on the other side, but it's the gateway by which you appear. So similarly, even deities manifest through these expansions of Krishna. They don't cause him, but they're the way in which he appears is through them. We're actually surrounded, material energy, spiritual energy, the jiva, which is marginal. All these expansions of Krishna are populating what we call reality. And so what we can take from that is appreciation, wonder, a feeling of being protected, like a child who understands, and maybe curiosity. We want to understand more. And we will take up some expertise, some amount of, sub kind of like ownership or sub, responsibility in any field, whether it's farming or whatever. We're always going to do something as we develop as people, but it should always be in this mood of, I'm just a servant of Krishna. As Sankarshan, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, they're God themselves, and they're also in the mode of like just service to Krishna. So let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva along with his plenary expansions, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshan. Chai. So just to recap, hearing about a little bit about the technical science of Vishnu Tattva, how, in what order, for what purpose Krishna manifests in the Vishnu Tattva, meaning the Tattva, the truth of the expansions of God, and how it is Bhagavatam is going to explain that more and more, and how that's just like for a child coming to a maturing realization of the simplicity of the world. Actually, well, it's true that things are always simple. There's a simultaneous truth of they're also very complicated, and every little thing you look at, the closer you look at it, the more it becomes complicated. Like you can take a microscope to the carpet and it looks like one thing, it's actually like a million different things. You can like get closer and closer in on each of those million different things, and they become like a smaller thing. So ultimately, we're not meant to try to figure it all out ourselves. We're not Gyanis, but we can appreciate that Krishna has surrounded us with whatever we need. And we can therefore engage full-heartedly with full confidence in the Bhakti Yoga process and hear and chant, as this verse says. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Let's take some comments or questions or reflections.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that Balaram was the first expansion of Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that we're all part and parcel of Krishna, so I don't know. Balaram's his brother, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So one way that can maybe help you is understanding it's not an expansion through time. Like if we say somebody has a child in this material context, like the child was not manifest, then they're manifest. And if you think you are the body, you could think like they didn't exist and then they do exist. Actually, that's not true because they did exist in some other form. But in material consciousness, like they're not there, then they're there, and maybe later they're not there again.
Yeah.
That's material consciousness. That's manifestation through time. It's winter, plants die,
Yeah.
then they remanifest, and it's like they release, different things, spores, and so those other plants are like children of the plants that came out. And Krishna is not like that. That's material consciousness. The relationship is what's called ontological relationship. So Balaram is eternally expanding from Krishna. He's eternally existing, as is Krishna. They're all existing in a sphere that's not marked by time. Time as we understand it. The influence of time is only in the material world, right? For purposes. It actually has a clear purpose. But the material world itself is an expansion of Kshirodakshai Vishnu, and from before him, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, who comes from Mahavishnu, who comes from Mahasankarsana, who comes from Mahanarayana, who comes from Balaram. And at every step, there's a purpose to that. It's not whimsical.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about the Vishnu Tattva, all these forms of God, they're always God, right? But one way you can kind of make sense how Balaram is an expansion of Krishna in Vrindavan, in Krishna's pastimes. Balaram, his mode is to please and satisfy Krishna, right? Krishna himself is the center. And Balaram has his own gopis. He has his own, devotees who are very dedicated to him because he's also supremely attractive. But Balaram is also like engaging others, bringing them closer to Krishna. Balaram is like the Adi Guru, the original form of Guru that empowers anybody to function as Guru, because Guru means somebody who brings you closer to Krishna, which Balaram is actually the first person to do that. Is he's so interested in serving Krishna that ultimately the material world manifests through him. All these jivas manifest, and they get different chances through his sub-incarnations, as this incarnation, that incarnation. So this strong service attitude is there.
Why is it said that the Mridanga is also an expansion of Balaram?
Right, because actually, when we're playing on a Mridanga, when we're playing on a harmonium, playing on kartals, you have a xylophone used in Krishna's service. Then when it's used in Krishna's service, it's functionally transformed, because now you're using Krishna's apparently external energy in the service of Krishna. It becomes internal energy. It's like it's now actually considered to be non-different from Balaram. It's described that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, for example, a lot of this is described in the Adi Lila. In the chapter, I think chapter 5, the glories of Lord Nityananda Balaram, Nityananda and Balaram being the same person. Nityananda comes again in Gaur Lila. Balaram comes again as Nityananda. In that chapter, there's a lot, and that's probably the most definitive place you can see how it is Balaram's service to Krishna manifests. For example, Balaram expands as Krishna's paraphernalia. He expands as Krishna's Brahman thread, Krishna's bedstead, and in items of service. So when we call the drum or any other instrument used in Krishna's service Balaram, it's reminding ourselves and others that these are actually empowered. Now we're using them for a purpose. They're not things you could just buy at a store, and they're the same as any other thing. They've been used purposefully, therefore we're transforming them. So for ourselves, we treat them with respect. We're trying to like step over instruments, or it's a practice for ourselves to remind ourselves that we're actually engaged in a process of bhakti, and all the paraphernalia for that service to Krishna in the bhakti process is coming through Balaram. So we treat it. So it's just a reminder to treat it in a sacred way. It's mental.
Gymnastics.
Yeah, it's just kind of like mnemonic. It's like it's supporting us. It's a memory device.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
So why isn't it called Krishna Tattva instead of, why is it called Vishnu Tattva?
I don't know.
Okay.
Probably because they're non-different.
Yeah.
you
That
know?
makes sense. That's what I figured, but I wanted to be
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
Okay.
sometimes it is called Krishna Tattva.
okay.
Um, yeah. And then at the end, Prabhupada says, these expansions, those 4 expansions, are the original deities for all of the truths, namely the Vishnu Tattva or Shakti Tattva. Shakti means energetic expansions. So his feminine aspects, Queen of Dwarka, the gopis of Vrindavan. Jivas are also considered to be Shakti, but we're not, until we're perfect in bhakti. We're marginal. We can be under the shelter of the internal energy. We can be under the shelter of the external energy. So we're also Shakti, but we're Shakti with a choice versus Shakti that's like perfected and totally dedicated to Krishna.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My reflection is that Krishna, through Vishnu Tattva and Shakti Tattva, has unlimited expansions, and therefore everything is connected back to source. And within that, like a child being fed by their parents, that we're constantly being held and supported by this grander energetic spiritual system, whether we're aware of it or not. And so the practice is to become more aware of it and
Yeah.
have gratitude and reverence for it. And then, you know, it comes back to the bhakti of, and then acting and living in devotional service, like as an expression of that gratitude and reverence and realization.
Definitely. That really speaks to the attitude we should have when we're engaging in study of Bhagavatam, because we may get to sections where, or let's say you get to the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adhyaya, chapter 5, and it is this very technical description of Balaram's modes of service. When you get to that, we're reading it in the mode of developing appreciation. It's actually an expression of our bhakti. We're not reading it because we are fundamentally interested in acquiring knowledge. We're not reading it because, I'm supposed to read this. If I don't read it, bad. If I read it, I'm good.
Mm.
We're fundamentally, just like a child is starting to realize there's all this variety. We can approach it respectfully, that variety, and start to try to understand it in a mode of letting that develop our appreciation for Krishna. It feeds our bhakti. And that way bhakti becomes prime over gyan, because it is very interesting, actually. The more it's described in Bhagavatam, the more intellectually stimulating it is. It's really fantastic stuff. But all of our acharyas are taking us through the Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada is taking us through the Bhagavatam in a mode of not intellectual analysis, but a mode of appreciation, love, service, wonderment, amazement. And when we're reading, even when we're receiving transcendental knowledge, and it's becoming part of us, it's become part of our own, what we like, just like when you get something in your bhakti process, it can be transcendental knowledge, it can be some renunciation, it can be some realization, it can be some special ability, some apparently karmic ability, some ability to do something in a better, more expert way. That's a pure devotee, or a devotee who's trying to practice pure devotional service, sees that as just another aspect of their developing relationship with Krishna. So, oh, now I get to receive transcendental knowledge. How much of it I'll understand right away, I don't know, but I'll try, and I'll appreciate it. And it's all part of my relationship with Krishna. This is just another way in which Krishna is reciprocating with me, and I'm developing with him.
Right. So we're reading Shastra, we're engaging in this practice of hearing, not simply to acquire knowledge and understand the entire system, but rather to have more love of God.
Absolutely.
Deepen our devotion.
Deepen our devotion. And so for somebody who's really intellectual in this
That's
life,
difficult.
they have to remember that this is not about being intellectual. And for somebody who's really not intellectual, they have to remember that this is not a place to avoid the intellectual stuff. It's like, it's all just a medium for Krishna's,
Grace.
for knowledge of Krishna, understanding of Krishna, and the truth of Krishna to manifest. And that can be exactly your kind of thing, or totally not your kind of thing, or whatever. But it's all really terrific stuff. And if it's received in that right mode, then definitely does deepen our relationship. Thank you.
Hi, Bull.
Well,
I I was thinking about I mean I loved listening to about like all of the your discussion around incarnations and manifestations. And then really thinking about it as like a child. And then you said something really beautiful as you were teaching. You said the deity is the gateway and Krishna is expanded through them. And then you went on to discuss like essentially what you can feel through the deity. And you said appreciation, love, wonder, safety, curiosity, and then you went etc. It was more things, but I wrote etc. in my notes. And all of those elements are such pure innocent characteristics of the soul, and it's very childlike, like those really beautiful elements of appreciation, wonder, love, safety, curiosity. It's so pure. And it's a really good reminder for me to just be in those, like it's okay to still be young in it, right? To still be in the essence of it in these like really beautiful, simple ways. Because like this morning I was reading Bhagavatam with Siddhanta and I was like stumbling through all of the Sanskrit and I just said out loud, I'm so embarrassed by this. I said that out loud. And he was just like, you don't need to be. And um it's in the process of deepening and bhakti, in the process of learning, it's like it's such a beautiful reminder to me to hear you share it like this. And I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for sharing the way you do.
welcome. Krishna is always astonishing for his devotees. The more advanced you get, the more you're amazed by him. We can see like with Srila Prabhupada or any of our deeply empowered acharyas, they never actually lose that childlike quality, even though someone like, for example, Jiva Goswami is quite literally the greatest philosopher I've ever come across. It's not even close. Um, you can take any of these so-called 20th century philosophers and tie them into circles, but the essential, that's all in service. That was his particular service, for example, to establish the Sandarbhas, to give the philosophical basis for the whole Bhagavatam being our primary source of evidence. And he did that perfectly, but that's all just part of their service profile. And in their relationship with Krishna, they're all like always amazed. We never actually capture him. We never actually like make him ours by the force of our greatness, whether it's intellectual greatness or anything else. That never happens. He can give himself to us, but it's always going to be the case that he's bigger than us. He's always more. There's always more to discover. There's always more detail. There's always apparent contradiction to be resolved. And sometimes it gets resolved right away. Sometimes it gets resolved over years. Sometimes it doesn't get ever resolved, until Krishna wants to resolve it. He's magical. He's magical. I read the third canto this year for probably the fourth or fifth time. I've read that canto more than any other canto, I think. And there was so many things that came up that were just like that I'd read 5 times, now, and it was like, wow, just wow. And it doesn't stop being wow. And that's a good thing. Chai. Leanne, would you like to say anything? Going long today.
Yes.
Lisa.
Um, let's see. So I just kept reflecting on, as everyone's speaking and asking questions too, about the different avatars when you mentioned for each yogya that he
Yuga.
yuga,
Yeah, every age.
to bring new things to help like and adapt to what was going on at those times too. So yeah, the word adapt just kept like coming out as I was like reflecting on that, and just how much he like really wants everyone to, remember him and be with him. And just, it's amazing how often he adapted, right?
Yeah. Well, in ignorance, we may think that our parents aren't doing much, and we realize, oh wow, they're doing so much. Similarly, in ignorance, someone may think, God, what a silly idea. And then one starts to develop a little bit of a relationship, an approach, and then they realize bit by bit, more and more, oh, he's actually doing everything all the time. He's never inattentive. He's constantly waiting for the slightest indication that I'm interested in him, and he reciprocates with that. He's constantly present, but he's also not forcing himself on anybody. What an amazing balancing act.
Yeah, so thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarupashta kripasintu devacha patitanam pavanebhyo. Jai. Great to be back with all of you.